welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. This is our audio game jam where we pitch and workshop brand new video game ideas. These are video games that do not, probably cannot, and definitely should not exist. But we're here going against the grain of God and nature to bring these video game ideas into your ears, into your minds, into your hearts, hopefully. My name is Ryan Hamann. You can call me H.
I'm Ryan Quintal. You can call me Q. Mr. H, you know what this past weekend was?
As of the time of release, it would have been Mother's Day. Are you trying to get me into like some sort of a entrapment situation where it looks like I didn't know it was Mother's Day?
No, you know what? No, I was referring to our recording time last weekend, but yes, Mother's Day is indeed coming. Have you done anything there? Or is it, I never know what to do for Mother's Day.
Yeah, actually, my mom is on vacation, so...
Oh, nice and easy. She's already having the time of her life.
Yeah, that's right.
Growing up for me, Dad would be the one who would occasionally dabble in playing video games or get involved or at least take an interest in that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think Mom was happy to have it relegated to being something to take care of around birthday and Christmas time.
So she really hates that you're doing this every week. So as a Mother's Day present, we're ending the show. This is our last episode.
This is it. I'm going to become a doctor finally, Mom. No, she never wanted to become a doctor.
No, she just wanted you to marry rich.
That's right.
She knew that was the best she could expect from you.
Yeah, she was like, maybe he can trick someone to finally.
Sorry, what was this last weekend? We've danced around it.
Oh yeah, so this past weekend, for people that are hearing this, we record this early in May, was Free Comic Book Day.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And so I went to the local comic book store, and there was just a whole slew of comic books out and about, and I guess they were I assumed I was going to get one free comic book. This store was giving away 5 free comic books, and if you purchase something, an additional 5, and there was enough to go around. Wow. So it was crazy. It was great to see, families there and parents taking their kids and kids getting into that kind of thing. And I didn't do a lot of comic book reading as a kid, but I loved the pictures and I loved checking them. Like I would trace them and use them as like drawing reference and all that kind of stuff. I've always had an affection for comic books.
Did they have the ARMS comic based on the Nintendo game?
Are you kidding me? Is that real? No, they didn't.
I think that they were making something like that for Free Comic Book Day, but I don't know the distribution range of that or how popular it was going to be.
I want to get Dr. Curly Arms and Ramen Noodle Girl. I want every single character in the story.
That would be a really good iteration of... I like those pictures where they just have an ill-informed person name all of the characters, like the Star Wars characters or whatever. That'd be a fun version of that. Although you'd kind of miss out on the joke because most people also don't know their actual names.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know why, but the ARMS character names, even though I think they even say them when you select them, don't they? Isn't it that sort of presentation? I can't keep them in my head though.
Yeah, there's Quintal. That's my main. So that's let's see, off the top of my head, let's see how many I can get. Okay, we got Springman, Ribbon Girl, Quintal, Bark and Bite, the robot cop and dog.
Who's there's a mummy guy.
Right, that's Master Mummy.
Okay.
There's Kid Cobra, I believe is his name. There's Ninjara, or is that the Lego thing?
That's Ninjago.
Okay. Well,
no,
Ninjara,
so
then.
Ninjara is right. And Ramen Noodle Girl is actually Min Min. I did know that.
Yeah, Min Min. That's right. What's the name of the slime guy? Flubber. What is his name?
Yes. He's DNA. He's
Helix. There we go.
All right, we did it.
That little Mr. Bill face.
You know what? I don't know what it is about ARMS, whether it's presentation or that darn good soundtrack that we've even shared together on Sound to Play. But there's something about that game, like I'm not playing it, but I have such a fond place in my heart for it. Like I would readily buy a sequel, and I would gladly, like if somebody was like, hey, do you want to play ARMS? I'd be like, yes, I've been waiting for someone else to ask.
I feel the same way about that and Splatoon 2. Like I love the games when I jump back into them. And I went back to ARMS recently within the last few weeks just to play for a couple of days. And it was so much fun. And I really want to spend more time with it. It's just, finding time. And it's just really hard to allocate time to games that feel like they don't have an ending.
Yeah. And it also is like other than, I guess, unlocking the ARMS does not necessarily feel like you're making like meaningful progress in them.
Yeah, that's true. Anyways, they did add an achievement system so you can get badges and stuff now.
Never mind. I spoke too soon.
There's your meaningful progress.
You know what I do love? I love, and I know we got to get to our game pitches, but I love that occasionally the Kane and Rince crew will go and I think it's Mario Kart is one of their go-to things to play with the community. I would love to take part in those in some way. Maybe we can have a little, if any of our listeners have ARMS, we could host an ARMS tournament because I use the motion controls, so I'll get way into it.
Oh yeah, me too. Yeah, I'll have to get some sort of a headset.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, let's get to our video game pitches. These are brand new video game ideas created by us right here and now. I mean, we've written them beforehand, but we will workshop them into something entirely brand new.
Speak for yourself.
Well, yeah, fair enough. Q, it is your turn to go first. What are you bringing us today?
My partner recently brought my attention to a television show called Early Edition. And on this, do you know this show?
The name sounds familiar. That's not that British show that was like a parody science educational tape?
No, well, I mean...
That's Look Around You in it. I don't know. What is Early Edition?
So Early Edition is a show from the 90s in which... it doesn't matter the celebrity, but it is Kyle Chandler, plays a guy who one day wakes up and goes to get his morning newspaper, and it has tomorrow's news, and it is dated tomorrow. And so, as you might expect, it is a episodic series, episode by episode, of him going around trying to right the wrongs that are appearing in tomorrow's news, a la A Quantum Leap, but in a little bit more linear and smaller scale.
Interesting. Okay.
I thought it could be interesting to do either something where we have a GTA style game, and it is Early Edition, and every day, kind of the morning news, you check maybe the modern equivalent is a news app. And for some reason you've got tomorrow's news, and you're going around and trying to right the wrongs, or potentially...
I guess you set your time zone to Japan, and so you get it early.
Yes, exactly. That's the premise of the whole thing. And either you're able to interfere, or potentially you end up, if it's a narrative story, you end up causing some of the news events. Or I thought maybe it'd be interesting to explore an angle of this that turns it into a survival horror game where every day you wake up and you find you get some sort of flash or some sort of vision as to how you're going to die that day. And you get these horrible Lara Croft visions of, drowning and spikes and all this kind of crazy stuff. And you gotta somehow survive the day without doing that. So maybe one, maybe the other, maybe some mixture in between, but that's the pitch.
All right, and we'll start the clock. That is a really funny twist on it, actually, where you see how you're going to die, and so you just say, okay, I'm going to get hit by a truck. Obviously, I'll just stay off the roads. But then if a truck comes and, hits you in a really unpredictable place, it's like there's a Nicolas Cage movie called The Wicker Man, one of his worst ones, and that's, a pretty significant achievement. But there's one scene where he's just having a memory of somebody getting hit by a truck, but he sees it happen, how movies get sometimes. He sees it happen on a ferry boat, and this truck just plows through this person that's just standing on the deck of the ferry, and it just feels so weird and random that I was always amused by that scene. And, something to similar effect could happen here if it was more of like a comedy game rather than something you were actually supposed to get good at.
I think it would be interesting too, especially if, so many of these, like one of the things Grand Theft Auto I don't feel like executes on necessarily is the attempt of making it a little bit more survival based, where you're waking up every day, and if you went so far out of your way to move something or change a series of events, that the next day you're even more potentially resource limited, or you're maybe you have the ability to become tired or limited physically in some way. You go out of your way to save someone, turns out you break an arm or something, and now that's messed up for the remainder of the game even.
Thinking back to the early edition comparison that you made, pretty much every video game is kind of early edition already, because at the beginning of each day, you get quest markers like go to exactly this location to trigger this exact event, which is just some random person passing by the road. And, it's like, how would the person in universe know to go exactly here to trigger this event to happen?
When in all of these kind of more open world mission based games, you always get things like quest markers and a map that makes it really, really obvious where to go. I wonder what it would feel like potentially to go sort of rogue and take those empowering properties away from a player and ask them to remember the layout of the city, or of course you'd probably have to concentrate its size a little bit, but potentially saying, okay, well, that this murder that you saw in some future online video, like, looks like it takes place on a dock or something. Okay, so I have to be at the dock. You're almost analyzing a single tap through in a playthrough of a video to figure out what is happening, who's involved, and maybe be able to intervene before it happens.
That's one of the things that I really liked about Deadly Premonition, is that you are and I'm tasked with going all throughout this big open world city, essentially. It's a little small town, I should say, to solve these mysteries. But while you're given a marker on your map to where you need to go, the map is functionally useless in gameplay just because it's like way too zoomed in, which might have been an intentional decision. It might not have been. But basically you're just you're basing where to go on your own knowledge of the town, where things are. You'll notice landmarks in the city that kind of give you indications of where to turn once you get familiar with the layout of the city. And when it comes to investigating crime scenes and people's homes, a lot of it is just based on intuition. Like, okay, I kind of know where a weapon would be hidden or something like that. Like, let's use some good old intuition before we start relying on the digital markers that every game kind of holds your hands with.
I didn't play a lot of Deadly Premonition, but I did see a chunk of it get played, and I like the idea of maybe the environment, even if you did do a more open world, maybe pacing things like puzzles or character movement in that sort of grayish, rainy feeling in place, because for all intents and purposes, the Rockstar games are always trying to mirror reality in a way. And I wonder how something like, Deadly Premonition or even a Resident Evil of sorts would feel if you place someone smack in the middle of a world like that. It's almost like the answer to that is kind of Dead Rising, but Dead Rising is overly empowering at this point.
Now, one of the things about time travel narratives, this isn't a time travel narrative per se, but it has kind of Back to the Future-ish type of elements, getting that sports almanac early. But sometimes the future or the course of events as they were originally intended to happen kind of push back. You'll get that in the H.G. Wells novel, The Time Machine.
Yeah.
And in a lot of other fiction surrounding that. And so sometimes, the best laid plans, even when you have the foreknowledge, end up not being able to circumvent these undesirable outcomes, which I guess for a video game would be kind of disappointing.
Yeah, you know what? I think to myself, there's like a well-known sort of, not really exploit, but kind of way to make a ton of money in Grand Theft Auto 5 that is using the banking system and the stock market appropriately after each of your corresponding story missions.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you ask the player throughout the adventure to make certain time-based commitments, right? Like, you have to put your money, you know, maybe you have an investment fund and you have to put your money in some company and you can't change it for a week, you know, and you have to rent a particular car, you know, or just make all these different decisions about what resources you'll have access to, and you have to do it for a committed amount of time, and then therefore part of the puzzle of fixing things, or for example, you find out the stock that you have all your cash in is about to crash tomorrow. Now you have a different kind of puzzle to solve, which is, I'm stuck in that commitment, but I'm now going to figure out how I can stop that particular event from happening. And you have to choose each day of like, okay, well, I have to invest in, you know, giving myself bolstered resources next time around, or else I'm not going to be able to help in day 3.
Is this just somebody who really takes their promises seriously?
Yeah, potentially. But I mean, if you did have some sort of automated way of handling something, maybe you come to the city as a guest, as a person who doesn't belong there, and you have committed to 7 nights in a particular hotel. Okay, well, that is now your base for the next 7 days, and your bank only lets you transfer funds between different investment funds, once every month, or maybe once every 3 days. Different kinds of rhythms and cadences that kind of lock you into a mini set of circumstances that may or may not kind of go awry, and then you have to choose between potentially helping people or helping yourself.
Okay, so we're talking about a lot of kind of high concept ideas. What is the actual gameplay here? Is the core gameplay trading stocks, kind of like we talked about last week? Like, where is this going?
Sorry, no, I guess I meant like along the way, like that is happening in the background, in the periphery of Grand Theft Auto, right? Okay. So you have your sort of newspaper that comes out at the beginning of the day, and you're like, these people died. Let's call it a news website. You have access to it somehow a day in advance. You see, these people died. This person was fired from a thing. This company had a bad week. This company had a great week. You're just kind of perusing the news. And I would say like every day starts with really you trying to look pretty hard at the news. And we'll say like it works in such a way that the second you close your phone, potentially, you don't have access to that information anymore. So maybe you're only allowed to save or write down 1 or 2 things that you think are of, major importance that day. And then you're kind of going out into the world and trying to shape the events to move them in different directions. And some of them you might be motivated to do that because you need to help yourself, because you're strapped of resources and you're not going to be able to pay a potential medical bill or potentially have the equipment to go and save somebody else the very next day. Because you're not a criminal. You can't necessarily just like walk into a giant office building and kill everybody and get to the top floor. You're going to have to figure out ways to actually navigate those spaces.
We're out of time there. Now, do you have a name for this game?
I do not. And I know that we didn't get to talk about a lot of gameplay stuff, but I think, listeners, please leave a comment, tweet at us, and help figure out. I feel like in my head it feels a lot like a Grand Theft Auto, but I don't know.
All right, well, we are going to have to come up with some sort of a name to put on the episode title anyways.
Why don't we take Early Edition and Deadly Premonition and call it Early Premonition?
I like how redundant it is. Well, Early Premonition it is then. All right, I will move into my pitch. This one is another VR game because that's basically what I do. What I want to do is a first person, obviously it's in VR. You build a fort around you, or you can choose to inhabit a fort And inspired by the Wii game Boom Blocks, one of the modes that you can play in that, you face off either one-on-one or 4 all against each other free-for-all. And you can pick up items and throw them at your friends' forts and try to knock the forts down and get the forts to crash down on top of them. And it's all physicsy. You know, each person stands under one of these structures made of these Jenga-like blocks. And it's just, you know, you can choose to throw the balls at the load-bearing points on the structure to try to topple the entire thing, or to try to chip away one brick at a time to lessen the weight and make it fall down easier. But in the end, the opponent gets buried in rubble, and you know how frightening that could be in VR. So you get that sense of the Jenga blocks falling over. Let's start the clock and see where we can take that.
I like the concept of a very lighthearted game that ends in a very grave sort of burial. That is very good. So I haven't played Boom Blocks. I assume it's almost maybe something akin to a Angry Birds, but in 3D.
Kind of. Boom Blocks actually has a lot of different types of mini games. It was a Steven Spielberg game, actually.
Holy cow!
There were 2 of them. And in the first game, there were 4 main game modes that you can play with other players. One of them was pretty much just Jenga, using the Wiimote to select a block from a tower and pull it out, and sometimes there would be exploding blocks, and there were other times where you were trying to throw balls to knock blocks that had varying point values off of a stack, and you would each take turns throwing the balls and trying to hit progressively larger blocks that were worth more points. But yeah, there was a mode where each player had a fort made of blocks, and you would try to use the Wiimote to throw these balls at the other player's fort and to knock it all down. And so I just thought taking that same kind of concept, but putting you inside the fort in first person, and I don't know what comes from that. Maybe you're able to mend the fort using the objects around you. Maybe you're able to take the bricks out of the wall and throw those to have extra heavy hitting items. I don't know what changes in first person, but I'm sure we can find something.
Well, what if you added in some level of dodgeball-esque mechanics where potentially if something is caught when thrown, it has an extra level of sort of power up, or the other person is now, has some balance in their favor.
Yeah, if you're really confident that you can catch what they throw, then maybe you can like toss it to them, an easy one. And then, you know, if you're confident that you can catch it when they're throwing it back, then you get like an extra powerful one because it gains a little bit, and each time it's thrown back and forth.
I also have to think of, and stop me if I'm adding too much here, but I also think of games like Breakout and what is the Arkanoid, I guess is the other name for it, where sometimes you're hitting some blocks and there's kind of a mystery power up inside of them. And I love the idea of potentially, you know, you hit blocks as they fall. Potentially it's spawning 3 different balls that are all kind of moving at the same time, or potentially your catching glove can grow to double the size, so it's easier for you to catch it, or stuff like sticky balls. Maybe like all you can do is deflect the balls, and you can kind of get sticky glove and be able to actually harness it for a while and get a little bit more directional control.
One of the things that I like about Boom Blocks is that it's very aware of the weight of everything. You see a big tower of blocks in front of you, and a lot of them are worth 5 points, but then there's one like 50-point block in there, and you really want that one, but it's huge, and there's a lot that's on top of it. And, you know, just if you spend the entire game chucking at just that one block, trying to inch it a little bit closer towards falling over, ultimately you're going to go home disappointed because, you know, it's not going to fall as easily as you would hope. Although if it does, then it topples over everything that's on top of it as well, and you've got a massive payout. But that's kind of a good risk versus reward. Targeting those points of, like I said before, those load-bearing points on the structure, Because those are going to be the hardest to displace, but with the highest destructive capability.
And I like the concept of maybe looking at a situation, and especially in VR, where perhaps you have some agency to actually get some different angles on things, or have those kind of teleport pads so you can really look at the entirety of somebody else's fort and see where you think structural weaknesses might be. It's almost like if you let someone just build their own fort in order to force them not to build the same thing every time, maybe you give different allotments of different weights or weaknesses of block, and see if they can deal with their current setup or configuration.
I wonder if there would be an ideal size of a fort or different builds, and people would come up with these, you know, how you can kind of wedge blocks underneath each other to strengthen them. I'm sure we'd get some pretty creative stuff. But I guess one of the things that I'm curious about is the win condition. If it was just knocking a fort over, I guess if you were constructing your own fort, then you can just like put just a bunch of blocks on the ground and not stack them on top of each other. So there's really nothing to knock over.
Sure.
Or, you know, there's ways that you can mess with the system, I'm sure. Maybe the goal is to hit your opponent enough, and all the walls are there to protect them. So of course you would need to knock down the walls first, but maybe it's a combination of the two. I'm not sure.
Imagine if potentially you had to balance protecting yourself or potentially trying to catch the ball that your opponent's throwing with still the ability to kind of take pieces of your fort that might be around your person and quickly try and build something up around you, a la a Fortnite type of feeling. So you have sort of panic building happening. I think that's like one of the more interesting things that Fortnite has done that I thought is actually pretty original.
Yeah, that would be interesting, having to very quickly amend the things that are wrong with your fort, especially if this was in real time, or I guess like it makes the most sense. It would be the most fair if it was like taking turns, but then you would lose some of that urgency.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a matter of each of you go more active RPG style, and there's like cooldowns and potentially some power-ups remove some of those cooldowns, and maybe those just unlock a direct ability, like the ability to catch the ball, for example, and otherwise it has to be kind of ricocheting back and forth.
I guess you mentioned before the Breakout comparison. I'm kind of wondering what Breakout would be like in 3D if you had just a big tower of blocks, but the ball would make them disappear as you touch them, and like a racquetball rules maybe, where it bounces back to you and you have to catch it as well, but it's all just based on throwing it and catching it again.
Who baby, now you're talking my language. I love Ricochet and all of those sort of games. So what if you even had, in that scenario, there's still blocks, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so what if you even had potentially some blocks that were semi-permeable or sort of one side permeable, so you have, and maybe you don't even discover that except for when they get hit, so you go to launch something away, and you find it's coming back to you much sooner, potentially, than you may have originally thought.
Then, of course, any Breakout player will tell you that the most fun part of the game is getting the ball stuck bouncing behind the pattern and watching the entire screen clear for you without making any effort, really.
Yeah, but I think you could also do fun things in VR and in a 3D perspective of like potentially the entire room you're in could rotate and reflow blocks and restack them, and suddenly, you know, the critical angle, because I think that is one weakness of the sort of Breakout style games, of often when you find one angle, you know, you can kind of reliably trap the ball and you're not really forced to reassess, but it's just kind of a countdown until something is finished. But the idea of potentially introducing obstacles or something that makes you forcibly look at the problem from another angle. Maybe you're just, every once in a while, you're just sent to another wall in the room, and gravity is totally switched around, and now you got to kind of come at the problem from the bottom. That way it would almost be like Picross, right? Like chipping away at a 3D form.
If the wall was rotating, then the way that gravity affects it would be different and would keep things fresh. But we're out of time on that one. We have to come up with a name, and that's a little difficult because I don't know if we created one game or two games right now.
Yeah, I don't know. Did you have one in mind for the first game?
I mean, Fortnite seems to be because you're like a knight that's destroying the opponent's fort.
I mean, let's do it and we'll get all the SEO in the world.
Okay, well, yeah, let's call it Fortnite, but spelled with a K.
Perfect. Finally, we're rich.
Yep, we finally made it. Anyways, we're moving now to a game pitch from the community. This comes from a friend of mine, actually, Neil Piper. Not that all of you are not my friends. This is just somebody that I happen to
this is your
know
real
and
friend.
vacation with in real life, right? This comes from Neil, who says, a friend of mine and I were joking about designing and then getting really bad tattoo. So I thought, what if there was a VR game about being a tattoo artist? You're the tattoo artist on call, and you get a randomly generated mix of randomly generated pictures, quotes, and text descriptions from your customers. It's your job to meet their requests and give them the tattoo of their dreams or their nightmares. Much of the fun is doing your best to draw what they want, but even more of the fun could be sharing your failures with your friends when the tattoo your customer wants is ridiculous or you end up completely butchering their request. And we'll start there. There's a lot of ways to take that. I mean, this feels a little bit like a Jackbox type of game where you are encouraged to draw something poorly, and it kind of makes fun of you for how bad the drawing is. But I would like if each person that was competing had to submit like a shirtless, I guess that doesn't really fit for everybody. I was going to say a photo of yourself where you are bearing some kind of skin that a tattoo would be placed on.
Yes.
And then the person who loses, or maybe the person who wins, has like a crudely photoshopped them with the tattoo on their own body that everyone gets to see and laugh at throughout the game.
As somebody who uses Photoshop professionally, I can tell you that's very doable.
Oh, yes, definitely.
So, man, when you take it in the Jackbox direction, I think one of the things that would be interesting as playing the tattoo artist is people are probably pretty bad, or they don't have the vocabulary to describe what they really, really want in great detail, right? And often games like Telephone are funny because people misinterpret. So what if you had a Jackbox style game where somebody, like there's a very clear description from the computer to person one as to what they need to draw. Then person two is shown the picture and asked to describe it to the group. And they are kind of saying, okay, I need a tattoo that looks like a hot dog, like they're not really able to, because it's crudely drawn originally. Then they don't have the vocabulary.
Sounds a little crude from that one descriptor.
That's true. Hot dog, not hot dog. So now they kind of don't have the vocabulary to explain it exactly right to the group. And now you get the telephone effect of all three people, or the rest of the players all kind of trying to fulfill the art request of the, second person, based off of, this first person's just horrible source material.
It's kind of like that game that you can play with cards as well, kind of like Pictionary. I don't remember what the telephone version of Pictionary is called. It would be interesting to take this in the tattoo direction, if each competing character created an in-game model that looks like them in real life. And so you would have to actually tattoo it onto your opponent.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Or especially if it was under a time crunch. Yeah, you could have, hey, this is a great use of Bitmoji. Import your Bitmoji. and which I don't have a Bitmoji, but boy, oh boy, am I so strange every time I do receive one. Yeah, so Bitmojis can be in all these ridiculous poses, and you could probably even get away with like a Bitmoji revealing perhaps a little buttocks without it being too cagey to play in a social setting. Yeah, and then everybody's kind of trying to tattoo, or maybe multiple players. Oh man, multiple players each have access to a different color or potentially a brush of the tattoo gun, and you all have to kind of draw it together to come up with what the source material was.
Or here's an idea. Since this is in VR, maybe you have a body and your opponent is giving you a tattoo on your back, let's say, and you have to like look back and try to see what the tattoo looks like, which I realize, I guess you could cheese it. Like you can probably take the headset off or like hold it around to try to, fool the sensor into, I don't know. There would have to be some way to figure it out, but make it somewhat difficult to see. And then you try to reproduce the tattoo based on the little bit that you could see. On your
I was hoping you were going to say that you have to give yourself the tattoo.
That would be pretty funny as well.
I'm just like, especially as the levels go on and on and on, running out of spaces and strange organic shapes. Like, do you know the feeling of, maybe you don't do this because you're better than me, but that feeling of you're writing a sentence with pen or something in a notebook, and you realize that this paper is going to end before you are quite done with your word. I think you would get maybe the tattoo equivalent of that if you just continued to have to tattoo yourself.
Yeah, I always think in video games, tattoos are kind of disappointing because you have to choose what area you want to tattoo on. And then it's just like, if you choose the chest, it's just like a box with boundaries. It's like, and if you try to draw a little bit to the right, then it just like cuts off very sharply, which isn't really how tattoos work. Not that I would know because I've never gotten one, but
it's
just
true. There's a square area of your chest that no tattoo can go on.
Treating the entire body as a canvas that you can paint on, I can see being a lot of fun.
Yeah, especially if there was some way in a VR game to potentially do a social integration with like Twitch or Mixer, where you're having, the community just like request tattoo art be done. You kind of get the wish fulfillment and satisfaction of watching a tattoo artist at work in a virtual space, but potentially also hilarious and completely ridiculous.
It'd be harder than a real tattoo because you don't get any of the like feedback of actually pressing up against an arm. So you're kind of like floating in 3D space a little bit.
Yeah, you're right. I guess you'd have to do something with rumble or haptics, but I don't even know if those controllers have that.
Alternatively, you could be like miniature mosquito people tattooing like full-sized people, treat it almost like an art installation. Like how they put the scaffolding up to put up the giant murals. And maybe you fly around, or maybe you have to climb around this giant hairy back to try to give it a big tattoo.
Yeah, I mean, it even strikes me that it would be interesting to have the act of tattooing yourself. Like, it's interesting just to not have an undo or like any sort of way to save yourself, because once you go awry, or potentially maybe even you create things that would happen narratively or in the environment to potentially mess you up, you just have to work it in, right? You just have to figure it out.
If we go back to the Jackbox kind of direction, I could see rules for this being, you're given a prompt that you're supposed to tattoo onto this other random figure. And this person can move. They're not going to stay entirely still. And so once you're done tattooing it, the resulting tattoo is shown to everybody, and they each have to come up with what they think the piece is called or what the original request was. And if any of them fool people into thinking that it was their name, then they get points. But if you are successful in portraying what you were paid to portray, then you get points if people guess the correct answer.
Oh, and H, why don't we add this in, which is a real thing tattoo artists deal with, which is somebody comes in already with a bad existing tattoo and you have to figure out like, all right, I guess I have to turn this into Kirby's head or something, you know, just really strange things to work around, right?
Yeah. They come in with a very specific request, like, I want a dragon, but they already have like a woman in a dress. And so you have to find some way to transform that into a dragon while they're kind of squirming and you have a time limit.
Ow.
That'd be fun.
I like the idea of the pain. Maybe you could use pain or sort of the vocal feedback of the customer to gauge that sort of pressure that you're applying, right? I think that would be a good indicator to give you sort of a realistic, if you see the person start to, you know, wiggle or wriggle or complain. You know, I have never gotten a tattoo, but I imagine there has to be points where the tattoo artist, don't they at some points like wipe down the surface to kind of clear off ink? So maybe, you know, Probably. If you stay in a particular line too long, it becomes very inky. And so you have to, you're not allowed to just have a single sustained brush, right? You're going to have to establish lines and you're going to have to complete those lines all in multiple passes.
Maybe the longer that you are continually painting, the more painful it is and the more that they'll squirm. And so obviously the sloppier it's going to be, but you're on a very strict time limit. And so you don't want to spend too much time waiting for the paint to kind of cool down, like those overheating mechanics in a lot of other games. That's all the time that we have time for on that one. That's a very good game. Now let's come up with a name for it.
Body canvas, something like that.
Since you're working with needles, you can call it Prictionary.
Oh man, Prictionary is pretty good, huh? Yeah, that would be exactly what they would call it in a Jackbox too. So that makes total sense.
It's better than Tat to the Future.
Oh God, yes, it is.
All right, Prictionary then. I like that. That was submitted to our website at playwrightcast.com/pitch, where you can go onto the website. Yes, you, the listener, no matter who you are, you can pitch us a game. It doesn't even have to be that fully formed. It can just be a random association of words and we will make a game out of it. You can give us literally anything and we will make a game out of it. I challenge you to find something very challenging and you know, give us something that you think that we won't be able to crack, and we will try our very best and come out with something that we are at least somewhat satisfied with at the end.
Special thank you to PROTODOME for the use of Hello World. It's our theme song off the album Blue Noise. Go check it out. It's very, very good.
And we will exit the show today with a miniature idea. Q, do you have anything for us today?
Yes, a gritty story-based game that is a sequel to Catherine, the puzzle platformer, where a man is struggling to choose his next cell phone.
All right. Well, just leave it at that then. Thank you very much for listening. We will catch you next week.
Bye.